So thank you all for coming and joining me today. It's really nice to see you all here and to be making this presentation today on this really interesting day, the day before we go into the final 5 days of the solar year. So today we're actually kind of looking at the kind of like the conjunction of the sacred calendar with the solar calendar. So the sacred calendar, as we know, has 260 days. The solar calendar is 365 days. And that is made up of 18 months of 20 days plus 1 month of 5 days. And this in the Highlands should be called Tsipinkir, but mostly it's known as Wayeb. And it is the closing days of the year. Now, some people will use this phrase, days without time. I don't really kind of like see it like that. I see it as days without a captain. That's what I like to see it as. Interestingly enough, of course, the 18 by 20 days is what is known as a tun, and that's a unit of the long count calendar. And this 5 days is this kind of weird day, weird days at the end of the calendar. Now, I have some, as usual, kind of interesting or strange ways of looking at it. And sometimes I think of the mam, the guardian of the year, the carrier of the year, rather like the captain of the ship. And we can imagine that the captain of the ship has been doing their job for the last 360 days and he's done. He's out of energy. And so maybe he's sleeping, maybe he's dead, we don't know. Who comes in to join? Well, we'll see that tomorrow, the first day of Wayeb, is 5 Ik, and 5 Ik was the year lord 4 years ago. Because there are 4 year lords, 4 bearers of the year. Ik, Kech, Ech, and Noch. And they go in a cycle, round and round. So every 4 years, the same year bearer will come back again. And we're finishing off the year of 9 Ik. And the last time that we had an Ik year was 5 Ik. 5 Ik, which is what appears as the Nawal of tomorrow, the beginning of the Wayab. So it's like I say, the idea of being the ghost of the captain of the last time, the year bearer was in power. That's who's driving the ship. So if you know that the ship is kind of like directionless or whatever, what do? You drop anchor for a little while. You go within. You don't make any hasty decisions. You don't make any big kind of like things to go on, because the energy is kind of like, you've only got like half an eye on things. And so this is kind of like what I see with Wayeb. It's kind of like it's seen as a time of introspection. Now, another thing that we might be familiar with, depending on our culture, of course, is those days between Christmas Day and New Year. Those days when maybe you don't get out of your pajamas, or you're kind of not really sure what day it is and what's going on, and like, was it Tuesday, Wednesday? We're not really sure. This, for me, is also a similar kind of sensation. The way is like, well, there's a lack of definition during it, which makes it excellent for personal retreat. And in fact, in some of the lineages here, particularly from what I understand in Momostanango, it's a time when you don't leave your house, you don't cut your hair, you don't light fires, you don't make public ceremonies. It's a time of introspection because, if you know that the energy is a bit funky out there, then you kind of like keep yourself safe, right? Now, there are other traditions that also kind of like, they might make their own ceremonies and that kind of thing. But I think that the big focus is on finishing off the year. It's about wrapping up one solar year in order to go into the next one. Now, many people will put their kind of like hopes, dreams or whatever onto December 31st, let's say, yeah? So December 31st, you're sitting there before you go out, putting on your clothes to go out to New Year's Eve or whatever, if that's your thing. You might be writing your resolutions, what you're going to do next year, what you didn't do this year. That 5 days between Christmas and New Year, sometimes we're having a review of what we did, what we could have done, what we could have done better, and what we want to do next year. And this, for me, this is kind of like the focus for Wayeb. It's about looking at what we did and how we're going to do it differently, what worked, what didn't work, and that kind of thing. And so there are 5 days from 0 to 4, confusingly, but that's the way the counting goes. And there's different things attached to them. So what I want to do today is just to guide you through each of these days with ideas about what they're about. So we're going to begin with 5 ik 0 Wayeb. Okay? So the first day of Wayeb. The first day of Wayeb, I've heard, can be about reflection. It's going to be reflection of what's been going on. Since 19th of February last year, since the year 9 ik took its seat, how has your year been? Reflecting back on what you have done, what you've missed, that kind of thing. But what is also the spirit of the year? Well, I like to associate 9 ik with the life breath, because we have 9, which is the number of life, and ik, which is about the wind. It's about our breathing. It's the breath of life coming back. Interestingly enough, as I kind of don't want to dwell too much on the situation that we've all been going through for the last 2 years, but what we're seeing right now is kind of like restrictions that had been in place are starting to fall. It's almost as if after a year of the life breath coming back, now we're ready to move forwards again. It was also a year for the voice of women to be heard. And very early on, there was a couple of women that stood up and kind of shook the establishment with their words. And so we see these things going on. But in your own personal experience, what have you done? What changes have you made? Because ik, the wind, also brings change. And so what life changes have come to you in the last 360 days? We're seeing it with 5 ik. Ik, again, it's the wind, it's about change, it's about the breath, but it's combined with the number 5. Now the number 5 represents the one hand. The number 5 is about work, it's about putting our energy into it. So this, we could say, if we're looking at it as the overview from the 9 ik year, this reflection could have been about what work, what energy did I put into my changes, what energy did I put into my communication, and maybe where I could have done with a bit more work on it. The next day, 1 Wayeb, falls on the day 6 akabal. The second day of Wayeb is associated with self-recognition. So once again, recognizing what you've done, but what in conjunction with what? Well, one of the things that you could see it in conjunction with, of course, is the 9 ik. What kind of like self-recognition do we have within a breath of life, within the words that we've been using? But here we see it with 6 akabal. Akabal is the nawal of the twilight, of the dawn and the dusk. It's about bringing things through, bringing new concepts through from the world of dream, from the world of the night into the world of the day. The number 6 can represent the family. It can also represent ultimate stability. And so when we see these with self-reflection, it's a time to reflect on kind of like what concepts you might have brought through to bring stability to your family during those 360 days. What concepts, our dreams turn to concepts. This is something that we want to bring into this world. And sometimes we need some self-reflection, some time to look back and say, well, how did I go about that? How did I do it? Did it work? Didn't it work? What more do I need to do with it? Because akabal for me, it's the beginning of the weaving. It's the base material that we're then going to weave into something else. Well, 6 akabal is stabilizing it. What did I stabilize in the year 9 ik that can be woven in the next year, maybe? The 3rd day of Wayeb. Now, sometimes we could almost imagine a kind of like inverted pyramid like that. And the 3rd day of Wayeb, the day 7 cat to Wayeb, may be kind of like the most profound, maybe kind of like the deepest day. We're right in the midpoint of the cycle. And it's about acceptance. As we go through life, there are things that we just have to accept, right? Things that we can change, things that we can't change, and all that kind of thing. But the really interesting thing in this cycle is that it's connected with the day 7 cat. So cat is the net. Cat is our carrying bag. It also represents our connections, our attachments. So like what we carry in our bag is what sustains us on our journey. Like we need to fill our bag with like what we need for our journey. There's no doubt about it. But sometimes, you start carrying around sentimental objects that are just holding you back. They're stopping you from moving forwards. You might as well load up your bag with rocks sometimes for those kind of objects. And we can think of this on a mental, physical, spiritual, or emotional level. Cat is also about liberty. It is about release from attachments. When we're making the fire when we're calling cat, sometimes we're going to add threads to the fire to ask for the release from what we need to drop, from the release from the attachments, release from our burdens. The number 7 can represent endings and finality. It can represent death. It can also represent choices. It's like standing on top of the pyramid, seeing what choices are open to you. So when we see 7 cat, what we're immediately looking at is kind of like, okay, what am I going to choose to drop? What am I going to choose to detach from? Now, is that a nice process? Well, we might feel relieved, we might feel healed afterwards. After all, we're going through the Tresena of Tihash, which is all about healing and cutting and that kind of thing. But sometimes we just got to accept that we've got to let things go. This is about cutting yourself free from the bonds which you might have made or might have prolonged themselves during the 9 ik year. On the day of 2 Wayeb, representing acceptance, it's like accepting your need to detach from that which is stopping you from going forwards. And that's, often emotionally not easy, let's say. Once again, kind of like, would you rather do it at home or in a big public ceremony? Because if that's the focus for the day, maybe you'd rather spend that at home kind of thing, So it's the acceptance in order to release, we could see that as. The 4th day of Wayeb is 8 Kan. The 4th day of Wayeb is apparently associated with definition, with defining where we're going. Now, again, this is a really interesting combination to have because 8 Kan. Now, we can see the 8 as representing wholeness. And that wholeness, the 8 we can see as the 1 which represents birth and beginnings, and the 7 which represents death and endings, coming together as completion. I like to also see it, and I know that this is skipping across the system, but we can see it like a yin-yang as well. It's like it's black and white in perfect harmony, yin and yang in perfect harmony. This is what we might all be aiming for, in a way, to come into balance, to bring balance. And here we see it connected with the Nawal Khan, which is about power and wisdom. It's about our life force energy. It's also about teaching. 8 Kan itself can be seen as a celebration of teachers. It could be a ceremonial day where we celebrate our teachers in our lives. But when we combine it with the fourth day of Wayeb, representing definition, what I would suggest it is drawing on the wholeness of your wisdom in order to define what it is you want to take into the next year. Okay? Because, when we see it with regards to the dark and the light, okay, we might talk about light workers and all that kind of thing, which is all very good, but really it's about balance. It's about bringing things into balance. That's where we need to be. When we can balance our energy, sometimes we might need to use what empowers us, and sometimes we might need to use what wisdom we have. One or the other, or both at the same time. If we're just trying to use one side because we're afraid of the other side, then it's not going to work. So 8 Kan is talking about drawing on the wholeness of your wisdom. And that wisdom might have come through being in the light places and in the dark places. But this is what you're going to need to help you to define where it is you're going in the next year. And so this is kind of like the focus for the day. Definition through drawing on the whole of the wisdom and everything that was taught to you by your teachers. Because you kind of our teachers, we love them. Sometimes they give us hard lessons, right? Sometimes they give us challenges or whatever. Sometimes we learn by being inspired by them, and sometimes we learn because we kind of don't want to do that again, kind of thing, right? And it's drawing on all of that wisdom in order to define where we're going and what we're doing. The final day of Wayeb, the day of emergence, is 9 kameh, and this is just one of the most incredible combinations that I've seen. The reason why I say that, as I say, for Wayeb, the day of emergence, I liken it to the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. So if you imagine that the whole of Wayeb has been going into the pupal state, think how that must feel for the butterfly. It's kind of like all of its insides are kind of like liquefying and turning into something else as it turns from caterpillar to butterfly. It's probably not pain-free, I don't think. But here we come to the emergence from the chrysalis. Here we're going to spread our wings. Here we're going to rise again. And here we see it with the day 9 kameh. So kameh means death. Kameh means transformation. Kameh is the connection to the ancestors. It's about facing our fears as well. So we have all of those things. But, if we take kameh as representing death, the number 9 represents life. And this is a kind of interesting thing, right? We've got life in the number, death in the nawal. This is the transformation which brings us to life. I just keep getting this image, this feeling. This is the phoenix rising from the ashes. This is the new life being born through transformation. And this is exactly on this day which represents emergence. And so this process going through Wayeb might be kind of rather difficult to go through. But once you've been through it, it's kind of like life starting again, transforming the death into life. And so these are the sort of things that I'm kind of looking at as we're going through this period as a kind of this is a very, very auspicious Nawal, 9 kameh. It can also represent, the 9 can represent the feminine. And kameh is transformation. So this could be, help your female healers, whatever, helping you to transform and overcome fears and that kind of thing. But really, this is almost like the resurrection. And what are we going to resurrect into? Tenkeh, which is the new year. So what is the new year about? Well, what is the day Tenkeh about? If you watched the Tresena video, then you've already got some idea from me about what Tenkeh is about. But you see here, this is what's going to be going on for our whole year. Kech representing the wilderness. Kech representing the mountains, the trees, the animals, our connection with nature. Kech, representing strength and spiritual leadership. And the number 10, representing community, togetherness, agreements and society. It was kind of interesting. I am very interested in another cycle, which would be the cycle of 52 years. And if we look back, the last time Tenkech was in power was the year 1970. And in the year 1970, in the US, the Environmental Protection Act came in, or the Environmental Protection Agency was birthed. We also saw the first Earth Day fell in a Tenkech year, just as they should, because it's kind of like getting things together, joining hands, and looking after or connecting with the natural world. And so this also brings in this year as being very much about connecting with the natural world and using what you find there to strengthen community, to strengthen the bonds and agreements within community. We can also see it as about connecting and making agreements about the natural world. This is what needs to happen this year. I mean, we could say that that's probably needed to happen for several years, but this year it's imperative to do that. It's got to be coming from the leaders as well. Now, there is another side of Kech. Kech can be rather dominant. It can be rather forceful. It can be like that, bull-headed kind of nature as well. And what we also see is kind of like in 1970, there was a lot of protesting going on and that kind of thing. A lot of clashes. Kent State happened in 1970, according to what I read the other day. And so we can almost imagine it's kind of like, if we don't make these agreements, if we don't go and get out in nature enough, then there could be a lot of tension boiling over within society, because the 10 is all about society. Large groups kind of like getting an idea in their head and going in one direction. And so this is a possibility. But I would say that as far as is kind of like humanly possible, as we go into the Tenkech year, it's a really important reminder to take our friends, take our family, take our community, and go and reconnect with the natural world. Go and take plenty of walks in. Make it your New Year's resolution, as it were, to go and take a walk in the forest every week or every month or something like that, and reconnect with the natural world. Okay? Thank you.